So let me ask, who has had what they would call like a good amount of experience with React? A couple folks. Who has had a little bit of experience with React? Who's had no experience with React? Okay, good. Good. We have a good mix. So I won't go into too much of the theory, and you'll see as we get into the code exactly what React is. But it is, as they say here, declarative, meaning what you do when you write a React app is you declare what you want the view to be, and then based on the state, React will render what that is. So React is differentiating between the actual view part and the state of that view. And React is component-based. Components in this case look a lot like HTML tags, but these are different kind of building blocks that we can use to make an app. And one of the things that you'll see about React that's really one of the innovations of it is that you build this kind of tree of different components that represent your view. And then anytime the state changes, so you add a new book or you remove a book, you flip a switch or you unflip the switch or whatever, React then re-renders the entire tree. And normally you would think that would be pretty costly in terms of time, in terms of resources. Like, you do one thing, it's re-rendering everything. You do one thing, it's re-rendering like, everything downstream from that. But it turns out that one of the big innovations that React brought was that they render that to something called a virtual DOM, which is a virtual representation of the actual DOM that you view and interact with. And by doing that, they're able to render it to the virtual DOM, which is a lot more lightweight to interact with. And then they do a diff between the virtual DOM and the actual DOM to figure out if there's something that needs to be updated. And so the net effect is the most costly operations, which is updating the actual DOM and having some sort of redraw or reflow. Those happen pretty sporadically, and it's just the like one or two things that have changed that they're updating because they have this other thing going on where they're rendering to the virtual DOM. So it's a kind of technical background that I think if you haven't had much experience with React, it'll make more sense as we get going. I won't say really any more about it. So the way to dive into a React project, one of the best ways is to increase your font size. Is that visible enough?
Yeah. Am I in the wrong Zoom?
Oh no, man, I always forget to start the Zoom. Thank you, Sabrina. Let's see. No, it should be going. Yeah, the thing is I'm not sharing the screen. That's the issue.
There we go.
Okay, so we're sharing the screen. You can see it okay?
Yeah.
Good. So the first thing that you want to do is you actually want to install Create React App. And the reason that you want to do this is because React, in order to get up and running, requires a handful of moving pieces in configuration that I think arguably you don't actually need to know much about to write a React app. It includes Babel, which is transpiling your code, and it has Webpack and this kind of collection of tools. But I actually really recommend using this because it allows you to focus on building the React app versus configuring the heck out of it before you even write a line of code. So you install this npm package. Is there anyone that's wanting to like actually follow along and do this? I think it'll make most sense if I just do it up here. So I've already done this where I install globally Create React App And that will allow me to run that command, create React app, to create a new one. So we'll do create React app, and we'll call this CRUD Mutably React live coding. So this is going to take a moment and install those things. And while it's doing that, I'm going to go to the Mutably starter repo that, that we have in GitHub. So this is the thing that you normally start the project with. And as soon as this is done, I'm going to clone this to another spot on my machine so that we can transfer some things over. Okay, so it gives you some commands here. Yarn start. So yarn is a works in the place of npm. So anywhere you see yarn command, there's an equivalent npm command. Yarn has some advantages, so that's why they use it here. So these are the commands that you can use to get your app up and running. But let's jump into the CRUD Mutably React live coding. And so you see the directory here. We've got a README, we've got some node modules, package JSON, public source. Let's make this a Git repo, and we're going to add everything and commit initial commit. Cool. So, and then what I want to do is make directory CRUD Mutably starter. Oh, you know what, I can, the easiest way to do this is git clone mutably starter to CRUD mutably starter. So this is going to add this into this project in that folder so that we can reference it. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the Git folder here so that it's not a separate repository. So now, if we look at this in Atom, we'll see what we've got.
No, you're going to delete the empty directory with rmdir.
Say it again.
You're going to delete the empty directory with rmdir, rmdir.
RMDIR. Okay.
You could do it for empty directories, not for.
Sure. All right. So here we go.
I just flipped it through.
And then the only other thing I want to add to this is a linter file. So I'm going to copy from a different project, mutably starter ESLint.js to here. And then set up. So this is just a script that I have that runs the ESLint configuration, the installing the packages.
Wait, lint set up in your own alias?
Yeah.
Okay.
What packages?
So it's actually just doing, and I should just show you this, it's doing this command, which is, I don't actually know, oh man, I don't actually know why the Airbnb folks do it this way. They have you install their package, but then there are some pure dependencies that are required, but are not just dependencies of the project. So a pure dependency you have to install manually on your own. And so then they wrote a script to help you install the package and its pure dependencies. Don't know why you would do that, but that's what they do. So, so if we look at the package JSON. Yeah, so we've got ESLint, ESLint config Airbnb base, and ESLint plugin import. So this base, I actually want a different package. What we want is the ESLint, so just ESLint config Airbnb, because the base package is when you're not doing React, but we're doing React here. So I'm actually going to run that command that they have, just copy and paste that in here, and that should install whatever packages we need. So we can actually go ahead and take a look at our baby React project already. We go to CRUD, Mutably, and if we do yarn start. React scripts command not found. Remove node modules and try installing this again. So for folks who are more or less new to a React app, the way that an app is typically structured, so you have this source directory where your code goes. It has an entry point, which is this index file. And in this index file, you're doing really very little. The purpose is just to import what's usually like an app component here. And so you notice this is the ES6 module import syntax. You import like your actual app, and then you run this command react.dom render, take this app and render it to this spot in the DOM.
Is React DOM the virtual DOM that you were talking about?
React DOM is a library that I guess the virtual DOM exists in the normal React package. Like that's where the reconciler is and all of that. I don't actually know exactly what the division of the different packages are.
This morning I went to the tutorial. It said that the React DOM is just specifically in charge of rendering the stuff on the DOM itself.
Yeah.
And then that's how you separate it from, because regular React import is just does all the I guess processing, maybe, and then the DOM is just strictly for displaying stuff on the DOM.
Yep, that makes sense.
Justin,
Yeah.
what's line 8 doing? Register service worker.
That's something that's part of this Create React app. Service workers, who knows what a service worker is? So service workers are something I know relatively little about, but it's this kind of emerging standard in browsers to allow you to do a handful of things like prefetching things and storing data locally in case you go offline, for example. Like a service worker would be one of the things you would use to allow your app to continue to function even if the internet connection goes down, because it can basically like intercept requests to the server. So it's doing some magic that I don't know exactly what it is, but all related to service workers. And for folks that are new to React, the thing that you'll notice here that's strange is this XML here, this HTML, XML looking tag. And you'll see this a lot in React. This is the way to notate a component. And the thing to know is that under the hood, what's actually happening when you do this, so this syntax is called JSX for XML. And what's actually happening under the hood is anytime a component like this is listed, it's actually taking that and converting it into a function call that is React create element. So there's no like real magic going on here. It's just that syntax gets transpiled to a React library call. So hopefully this is done and we can actually run the project. Yarns.
Can I have something in the service worker?
Sure.
That's actually mostly specifically used for PWAs, the progressive web apps.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I went in Africa in April, Google was there promoting it basically. So what it does is that it's mostly useful for offline apps, especially in Africa, because people don't have internet. So what it does is like when you load the application itself, it only basically fetches what you need for the time that you need it. And then the service workers in the background will basically catch whatever else that you need. And then when you get back online, it will either sync back up the documents or it will basically just get more information when you go back online. But that's mostly used for PWAs because Create React App now by default supports PWAs.
Cool.
That's what I learned.
Yeah, thanks. So here's our app. This is the default starter app, and we can go in here. And so we're rendering app. So let's take a look at what app is. And this is what a React component looks like. So you've got class, you extend component, and then you have a render function. And that render function here is just rendering this HTML. And so if we say, welcome to our CRUD Mutably project, in all caps for some reason, then we go over here and it hot reloads, which is one of the nice things about Create React App is that it has that configuration already done. And we've just edited our first React app. Yay! So where we want to go from here is to port over this CRUD Mutably starter project. And so the way to do that is I'm going to actually just take everything out of here. And we don't need the CSS file, and we don't need the logo file. And what we're going to do really is just build it in this app.js file for right now. So we're going to go to this CRUD Mutably starter. So this is the original project that you might have worked on. And we're going to take a few things from up here and paste them in the public index.html file. So this is the file that React sends to the browser. And this is the static part of it. And so what we can do is put this in. So the title is no longer React app. And we want a style sheet. We want this Bootstrap style sheet. Yes. We don't need this other style sheet. We don't need jQuery, but we can keep it around for right now. And we don't need the script.js. So this would be the typical pattern if you were doing like server-side rendering or something, is you have a script.js. We have got React. So no need to do that because React automatically renders itself into the page. So we've copied over the headers. I'm going to split this screen. So we've copied over the headers. And then what we want to do is copy over this bit so that we can actually React render this. So I'm going to go into the app.js, and then instead of that nice welcome screen that we got from React, I'm going to just paste this. And I don't think it likes HTML comments, so it's going to complain about that. What is my linter complaining about here? Components should be written as a pure function. Yeah. So we'll handle that in a minute. So you see what's happening here, that over here in the index.html file, we've got this kind of like default HTML file, and here we've got a div with an ID root, and that's what the index.js file is referring to. It's saying, find that div ID root and render our app there. So that's how we're wiring this up.
Where you find the div ID root, that's where the app is going to look, like in that section.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's going to take whatever your app looks like and plunk it in right there. So there's one thing, because the body in the original CRUD Mutably app had this class container. Why don't we just for kicks give the body over here that class container. So that should do it in terms of the HTML layout. Let's see if this is rendering. There we go. So we've got a thing. And your chosen resource, let's do the books, so we can just say books. And it hot reloads, good. So as you'll remember in this challenge, if you've done the CRUD Mutably project, the whole idea is that you're making an AJAX call to the server that we've provided, getting some information and displaying it. And then once you've gotten that information and display it, kind of the next thing to do is to add these edit buttons and delete buttons and things like that. So we can build that as we go. So the next thing up, so actually I don't think we need anything else from this directory. Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and delete that and then, so remove CRUD mutably starter, it's gone. And let's git add files and git commit ported over CRUD mutably project. Cool. So now, and here's a part where I may lean on you guys or ask you what you think is the best next step. So we've got this UL with this class list group, and what we want to do is in here render a list of LIs that contain the book data. So the next thing to do in my mind is let's actually set up a fetch call. So let's actually make our AJAX call to that server, to the database, and get some data back. So one of the things about React components is that they have lifecycle functions. And what this really means is a component has a few different stages. There's like when the component originally mounts, like when it's kind of originally created. There's when the component is updated. There's when the component is unmounted. And so you have these lifecycle functions that you can use to do certain things at certain times of the life of your component. And this has got a good, covers a bunch of those different lifecycle functions. But the one that we want is component did mount. And so what this is saying is the component will have rendered once, so it's good to know that. But once that component is rendered, this function gets called. And that's turns out to be a perfect time to make an AJAX call. So component did mount, takes no arguments. And what do we want to do here? Looking at my notes just to make sure I don't totally embarrass myself. So, oh. So yeah, anyway, here's where we make a fetch call. And so the fetch call is to, where is this? So it's to this, and we want to get books. So I believe it's just, yeah, it's just this. So we'll do a fetch to there, except slash books, and then we'll take the data, I think it's, we'll do the response and parse that. And forget how this works, response.json, is that how you, yeah. And then now we've got the JSON, and so we can just take some data and do something with it. So now the question is, what do we do with this? And one of the, I heard this person frame this like how to think about React apps in this way, and I think it's really right on. One of the most important things that you can do is identify what is the state that my application has, and when does it change? What is the state, and when does it change? And answering those two questions should help you make some decisions about how to structure your app. So we've got some data back now from this API, and the question is, where do we put it? We want to put it in the state of the app. Does that make sense to folks why we would do that? Because if you're thinking about an app like this, one way to think about its state is part of its state is what books am I showing, right? And so when we get our list of books, we'll want to actually just put those in state. And if we update a book or we remove a book or whatever, we're going to be changing state. And our view then is going to just represent whatever is in state. So we can actually dive into this, and it may make sense as we go. So all classes can have a constructor, and constructor can take props. And the first thing that you have to do in a constructor, if it's extending something, is called the super function. We'll give it props. And then we can define the initial state of our app. So this dot state equals, and we'll make it an object. And we want to have a list of books. So why don't we do books and make that an empty array. And I'm also going to put in a Boolean here, loading, so we can tell whether or not the app is in a loading state, meaning like it's going out to the server and requesting something. Our internet connection here is fast enough that that displaying loading on the page may not even, you may not even see it, but nevertheless a good thing to do, especially, nevertheless a good thing to do. So we're not actually loading in this particular moment. So we'll set loading to false. And so this is what our state looks like. It's an object, it has books, which is an array, and it has this Boolean. Of course, we can add things to it, but right now this should get us where we need to go. So when we're here, we've got this data, we want to update the state. One important thing to know about component state in React is that you don't mutate it directly. And there are some important reasons for that we won't get into. But the way to do it is this dot set state. And then you pass it an object where it has a key and an updated value for whatever that thing is. So in this case, we want to set state, and actually we want to set books to be, and now I don't remember exactly what this is, data.books. I suppose we could look at the API. So it gives us an object that has a books key. The books key has an array of all of the books. So yeah, so data.books should get us what we need, an array. And one of the things that we can do actually is up here, we could do a this.set state and have loading be true, because we're right about to call this fetch function. So that'll set loading to true, and we could then have something in our view that when loading is true displays, a little spinner or something like that. Right here, loading has completed, so we can do this dot set state loading is false.
Is there a reason you're calling two separate this dot set state calls to change the value of loading? Could you just do it when you're
Absolutely not.
setting books?
There's no good reason to do that. Thanks. So is this making sense so far? More or less?
Wait, how did you delete that?
How did what?
How did you delete those things so fast?
What things?
Did you delete like? Wait, am I tripping? Am I tripping? What
He
did you,
deleted things
those
that
two
good.
states, like when you merged them, how did you do that? Did you just?
You just leave those 2 lines.
Oh, that's what it was. Oh, no, am I tripping?
It's magic.
Yes, the 2 lines. Yes.
So if we go to our app, it's still not going to display really anything at this point because we haven't rendered any of this dynamic state data. So let's go ahead and do that. So one of the kind of funky, beautiful things about React JSX syntax is that you can mix the XML with JavaScript, and then inside that mix XML and more JavaScript. And it can get a little gnarly sometimes, but most of the time, especially after you've read it a little bit, you'll be able to see exactly what's going on. So what we want to do here, so this render function, let's get our list of books from state. So this is the destructuring syntax. Everybody's comfortable with that. We're pulling the state, the books key off of this dot state. So now down here in this UL, we want to do something. And that something is, let's take this books array, and you notice that I put these brackets, these curly braces. When you've got some XML, some HTML here, the curly braces indicate now we're back in JavaScript land. So let's take books and let's map over it. And map takes a function, so we'll take a book, and then the question is, what do we want to return? And I'm going to use parentheses here, because the parentheses allow us to then directly go back to the JSX syntax. So let's render an li, and in that li, let's put book.title, I think is what it is. Does that sound right? Suppose we'll find out soon enough. Book.title. And I'm calling book.title because the callback function here is getting a book. So book.title, and we'll close off that li. So if you look at what's happening here, you've got an array of books, you're mapping over it and turning each book element into this, this JSX element, which again, when React transpiles this, or when Babel transpiles this, really just becomes a call to React.createElement. So what we end up with then is an array of React elements. And React, when it's given both an element or an array of elements, it knows what to do. So in this case, it's actually just going to take each element of the array and render it to the page. So we should be able to just do this, and it should render out a list of the book titles. And let's see what we got. Huzzah! Magic! Cool so far?
One question.
Yeah.
I think I missed where you explained why you had this uploaded policy.
Yeah, so this is something that we could do next. I mean, why don't we do the loading thing? Yeah, why don't we do the loading thing and see if that answers any question you may have. Is this big enough? Should I make it a little bigger? It's fine, okay.
I have a quick question.
What's that?
Is on line 20, is there a reason like you're setting the whole state to be the value of, or line 29? Yeah, while you're setting the whole value of state to books, when all we really are going to render is just the books themselves.
Say it again.
is there a reason you're setting the whole value of state to books instead of just this state dot books?
So this is the destructuring syntax. So the whole value of state is not getting set to books. This what's happening on line 29 is equivalent to const books equals this dot state dot books. And so when you see this syntax, these curly braces on the left side of the equals, it's saying pull this key off of the element on the right and name it that same thing. You know, there are a handful of things in ES6 that do this shortcut. Like, you know, you may have noticed that you can create an object, let object equal, and what you could do here is if you had like let hello equal howdy, you can actually just do hello. And what that tells, what it tells JavaScript in this ES6 syntax is I want this key to be hello, and I want the value to be whatever the value of hello is. Because it just happens that you do this quite a bit. Normally, before ES6, you would need to do hello and then hello, like this, so that you're getting the value of it. So a handful of syntactical things that, that ES6 does for us that make it kind of handy. This is one of them. And so you can actually, you know, you can actually do this, and actually we're going to do this. So you can destructure two things off of the state object. So, so is this kind of basic React thing making sense? We have some state. That state initially doesn't have any books in it. As soon as this component mounts, it goes out and fetches, makes this fetch call, goes out and gets the list of books, and then puts those books in the state. And so this is the important part about how React works. When React sees that state has been updated, it re-renders. So it's not rendering just like constantly. It's waiting for something to react to. That's, you know, that's why we talk about reactive paradigms. So
what about the fetch call? Do you do any like error handling there or anything, or that's just usually how you write it?
Definitely. So you could definitely do a catch, and you could take an error, and you could say, what do we want to do with this? For now, we could just console log error during fetch, get request, and then we could send the error too. So that'll go out in that'll display in the console. Ultimately, we would want to do something where maybe we have a message, like a div message thing, and we can put a message in there if there's some sort of message to display. And if we had an error during the fetch, we could put a message in there that says, hey, we had a problem, try again, or something like that. So this loading thing, we've got a part of state that accurately reflects now whether we're loading data or not, because we set it to true here, set it to false when we're done. And actually, it would be good to set it to false here too, right? Because if the fetch fails, we don't want loading to still just be spinning. So loading false. So now what do we want to do with this? What do we want to do with loading?
Put in hiding div that only appears when loading is equal to true.
Okay. Yeah, does that make sense? You put in a div that's hidden and it only displays when loading is true. Yeah. Yeah, and so React will allow you to go a kind of step further than that, or make it even a little bit simpler. We don't even have to hide it. We can just not render it when we're not loading. So how would that look? Tell me where to what to do, what to type here.
Would that take place above the UL, excuse me, so like between line 43 and 44?
Sure. Between 43 and 45 now. Great. And what do we want to put here?
If loading is equal to true.
Okay. Which we can shortcut and just say if loading. And we're destructuring loading here, so we can just access it directly. So if loading.
Render something.
Yeah, render. Yeah, render that.
And what do we want to render?
Like a spinner or something.
Yeah, the actual loading bar.
Loading bar or loading image.
I wish I had like access just like out of memory some address to a spinner that we could just use. What's that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. How did they render that? Is it just an image? What's that?
It's built into
Mm-hmm.
I think they did an image with source equals to object or an object of React image.
Well, totally want to do this. Let's keep it a little simpler for right now. And instead of that spinner for the moment, let's render a div, and we can just say loading.
Yeah.
And close the div.
Can you make that spin?
What is the CSS? Oh my god.
I mean, we do have.
If you have font awesome, you just put spin on it.
This is transformation thing.
Yeah.
Transitions and transformations.
Ooh. Oh, that's cute. Loading.
Totally not a good use of time, but still want to do it. Was that?
A thing in the chat. If you require, you have to install Collagen. Never mind.
You can just do font awesome spin.
Let's stick with this for right now.
All right.
I'll leave it to you. I'll post this repo and I'll leave it to you to make magic with this. So let's see what happens when we do this. Unexpected token.
Is it because we need parentheses?
Instead of brackets for the JavaScript.
Let's see. Why isn't it liking?
Oh yeah, you gotta bracket around the if loading.
Yeah, isn't that what?
Does the div need to be in upper ends? Because it's not.
That could be, but let's see.
You probably need it in its own div. So
Like the if statement itself is on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking we were going to be doing. Like,
it's on the same level as books.
yeah.
So it's going to take under books.
So the workaround I've come up with this is I usually have to make a little free function, I guess, before it actually returns render that defines loading, and then you put loading in there. So loading is going to show up either way. Either it's going to be undefined and nothing will show up, or it will be defined with loading and that will show up. That's probably not the most efficient way. I haven't.
Yeah, I have a hunch that the reason that this is happening is because if is a statement, and what we want is a expression that given this particular syntax, we want an expression in here. And so the way that we could do that is loading, use the ternary, and then if we are loading, we can render that. What is it? Yeah. Otherwise, actually do this. So open parens, close parens, and otherwise we don't need to render anything.
So we need an empty div or no? Oh.
We could just do that for right now. Let's see if this runs. There we go.
There's a parent.
There's an extra stray here. Yeah, and so I don't know if you saw that. It was like a quarter of a second. I forget exactly what the Chrome, you can slow down your connection artificially. And
Network, yeah.
that would be a logical place for it. Slow 3G, how about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So we've got a slow 3G connection. We could do fast 3G. Good. So what next?
What next? Take over the world.
Take over the world.
Yes, with React.
Yeah.
Next, I would display the rest of the stuff in the book, and then maybe start working on a way to actually edit the book.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we can. I don't know if there's other stuff to display about
Is it
books.
author? I think it is. Yeah.
Author.
And image and release date.
Yes. Okay. So talk me through it.
It'll be another LI.
Well, we probably want to keep this LI representing like a row.
Oh yeah. So then it'll be like book that.
Mm-hmm. So we could do book.author.
And then maybe.
And it's just.
I think this is the. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
You may want to put in a line break.
Yeah. Maybe this will give us something a little more readable. Yeah, a little more readable.
What happened to the Great Gatsby?
I don't know.
Maybe whoever worked on this last edited the author.
F. Scott Fitzgerald was just not to their liking. Cool. So we've got the book title, the author, and then the image.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can put an image here and source equals, and then we can open up these curly brackets and it's book dot. This is just img image. Book dot image.
And do you need another breaker?
What's that?
Do you need another line, another break?
Yeah. Although we could actually do this all on one line. So one of the things we could do here. So there are a handful of different ways to style in React, and frankly, it's a little bit of a mess. I mean, so I'll say some people recommend inline styling, which is what we're about to do, and I actually think there's a number of very compelling reasons to do that. When you're doing React, people talk about composition. You think about like a music composer, and they're a person that takes something and puts one thing after another, you know, notes after notes after notes. They're composing things together to make a product. In React, you compose elements together to make your page. And so one of the arguments for using inline styles is that you can actually make components that represent the style that you want and wrap that around whatever it is that you want to have that style. So I think it's an interesting and relatively compelling way to do it. To do it, you do style, and then you pass it an object. And the object has keys that look a lot like CSS but aren't exactly. In CSS, you would have background -color, but because we're in JavaScript land, that doesn't work. So you do camel case color, like that. But in this case, what we want to do is just do width, and then this has to be in quotes. Let's do 50 pixels, and height is 50 pixels.
So I guess my question is, you prefer literal inline versus having a CSS attached to this component that you can?
Yeah, I do actually. And part of it is that you're co-locating the information that's relevant to what you're doing. That one of the bummers about CSS is that you've got all of your markup, and then if you want to find out what the style is for a particular thing, it might have a number of classes associated with it. And you have to look at each class and then find in your CSS hierarchy where that class is defined, and maybe it's defined here, but then the next one is defined in a different file. And I think there's an argument to be made for the value of keeping everything in one place where you can see it. Yeah.
Is there a way that inline styling that you could make it more efficient if you're using repeated styles or like, I guess components, or I guess you don't need to because they're components? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it depends on what you want to do. So if you want to just declare a style that applies to everything below it, you could just set that style. You could, there's nothing stopping you from doing something like, you know, const app styles equals, and then this. And there's nothing stopping you from just, you know, in JavaScript, assigning some styles to variables. You could do that in some master file and import them here. One of the things that's nice about React is that it affords you the flexibility to do that without requiring that you do it one way or the other. There are a lot of libraries that allow you to do CSS files versus, you know, JavaScript and CSS and JavaScript versus like just doing inline styles like this that I encourage you to check out. But let's go back, stick that there, and let's see what we get. Hey, it looks beautiful. Yeah, Great Gatsby is really not doing so well here. It's no image. Was that?
Where's the where you had a window up and you're seeing all the data you're pulling in?
Yeah, this.
For Great Gatsby.
Yeah, I think we.
Yeah, you could reset it.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Reset. And now. Still, oh, there it is. There we go. And you notice that our app didn't automatically refresh when we reset the data. That would be a functionality you would build in, is like periodically pulling the data or deciding some scheme by which you check if the data is updated and update it yourself. We have just built the when this thing loads, get some data part of it. So we're getting to the end of the hour, and what I want to challenge you to do, and I encourage you to, you know, if you want to dig into React, I encourage you to do this, is build out the rest of this CRUD Mutably app. And in particular, what you're going to want to think about is now the next piece of functionality is giving it an edit button and a save button. And if you remember, if you've done this before and you remember this, the functionality is you click the edit button, and once you click that, then the field becomes editable for the title, title or author or both. And then there's a save button that takes the place of that edit button. And one smart way to do that, I would say, is to create a new component. So this is my hint. Create a new component, and you could call it something like class editable row extends component. And the purpose of this component would be to render a row that has some state in it, which is this in edit mode, right? Because if the state says we're not in edit mode, you know what to render. You render an edit button, that just plain text, you're all good. If, on the contrary, you're in edit mode, so just like we did here, we conditionally rendered one thing or another. If you're in edit mode, you want to render something else. You want to render that save button. You want to render a text field that you can enter into. And what I anticipate will be the trickiest part about this is setting the like on-click event for the button. There's lots of good resources about this, you know, about how to do events and clicks and stuff like that, including the React docs are quite good on this. But that's my encouragement, is take this, which I'll post, and you know, you don't have to use this component, but I encourage you, write a component that displays the row and kind of handles all of that logic. You know, it doesn't have to know about fetching, it doesn't have to know about anything else, but it handles that logic. Make sense? Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.